The knock came exactly one day after I buried my husband. I remember thinking how cruel timing could be, how the world never paused just because mine had cracked open. I stood in the hallway of my house, still wearing black, still smelling faintly of lilies and damp earth, staring at the door like it might disappear if I waited long enough. It didn't. My name is Eliza Matthews. I'm 36 years old, and until last week, I was someone's wife. Now I wasn't sure who I was at all. When I opened the door, James Carter stood there, my neighbor from next door. 32, quiet, polite, the kind of man who nodded hello and never asked questions. He looked startled to see me in full mourning clothes, like he hadn't expected grief to look so close. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Your package was left at my place. I almost laughed. My husband was dead, and Amazon still found a way to keep going. Thank you, I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. James hesitated. He looked past me, into the house. I could tell he felt it too, the silence. The kind that presses against your ears until it hurts. If you need anything, he said carefully. Anything at all. I nodded. That's what everyone had been saying. And yet, when the door closed again, the house felt heavier than before. Mark's shoes were still by the door. His mug was still in the sink. His side of the bed still smelled like him. And I couldn't breathe. The next afternoon, around 4, I found myself standing on James's porch without fully remembering the walkover. I was holding a cup of coffee like it was an anchor, my hands wrapped so tightly around it they hurt. When he opened the door, his surprise quickly softened into concern. Hi, I said. I'm sorry to just show up like this, but do you mind if I come in for a minute? Of course not, he said immediately, stepping aside. His house was warm, not just temperature-wise. Lived in. Quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. He made tea. He didn't ask questions. That mattered more than he probably knew. We sat on the couch, steam rising between us, minutes stretching out. I stared at my cup because if I looked at him, I might fall apart. It's too quiet next door, I finally whispered. I thought I could handle it. I really did. But I don't want to be alone right now. He nodded once. No judgment. No pity. So I talked. Not about the funeral. Not about the heart attack. I talked about the years before. The distance. The nights Mark came home late and barely looked at me. How somewhere along the way, we became roommates sharing a last name. I know this sounds terrible, I said, finally looking up at him. But part of me feels like I already grieved him before he died. Like I lost him a long time ago. James didn't rush to comfort me. He didn't try to correct me. He just listened, like my words were allowed to exist without being fixed. Before I left, I glanced around his living room and surprised myself with a small smile. It's warm here, I said. That night, lying alone in my bed, his quiet presence stayed with me. And the next morning, when I couldn't focus on anything, I walked back over to his house with 2 paper bags from the deli. I figured you forgot to eat, I said, when he opened the door. Thought I'd bring lunch. The way he smiled, soft, grateful, made something loosen in my chest. We ate on his back patio under a gray sky. My hand brushed his by accident. It lingered, just for a second, long enough for both of us to notice. Then I pulled back, heart racing. I should go, I said quickly. This is probably too soon. You're not doing anything wrong, he replied gently. You don't have to be alone. As I walked back to my house, I knew something had shifted. Nothing had happened. And yet, everything had. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was crying. But because my house felt like it was watching me. The walls held too many memories, unfinished arguments, quiet dinners, years of pretending everything was fine. I kept hearing Mark's footsteps that weren't there. Kept reaching for space that no longer belonged to anyone. By morning, the sky was gray again, the kind that presses down on your chest. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out the window toward James's backyard. I told myself I wasn't looking for him. I lied. Around 10, I saw him through the fence, standing on his porch with his phone in hand, distracted, normal. The sight of him, alive, steady, made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my sweater and walked out the door. The knock felt louder this time. When James opened it, his eyes widened just slightly, like he'd already known it was me. "Can I come in?" I asked quietly. He stepped aside without hesitation. I walked into his living room slower than before, suddenly unsure. Like crossing that threshold meant admitting something I hadn't said out loud yet. I stood there, scanning the room, the couch, the clock ticking softly on the wall. "I wasn't planning to come," I said. "I went back and forth for an hour. I just didn't know where else to go." "You don't need a reason," he said gently. That was it. That was the moment my legs gave out. I curled up on the couch, knees pulled to my chest like I was trying to make myself smaller. James sat across from me, not crowding me, not touching me, just there. "I don't know how to be alone," I admitted. "I went from my parents' house straight into living with Mark. I've never really lived by myself." "That's a lot to carry," he said. I swallowed. The worst part is, I felt alone even when he was alive. For years. I think that's what scares me. That I already did the hardest part without realizing it. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Then I looked at him. Really looked. "Do you think it's wrong?" I asked. "That I don't feel guilty being here? Talking to you like this so soon?" He didn't rush his answer. "I don't think grief follows rules," he said. "And I don't think connection is something you're supposed to reject just because it shows up early." Something in my chest loosened. Like I'd been holding my breath for days without noticing. I stared at the floor. "I don't want to go back there tonight," I said. "Not because I'm running away. I feel like I'm going to suffocate if I sit in that house again." He nodded slowly. "You can stay here," he said. "I'll set up the guest room." I blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "But you're not alone." My eyes burned, but the tears still didn't fall. That evening passed quietly. He made chamomile tea. I sat on the couch while he pulled clean sheets from a closet. No awkwardness. No heavy conversations. Just safety. Before heading to bed, I stopped in the living room. "Thank you," I said softly, "for not asking too many questions. For making me feel like a person again." He smiled, small and sincere. I hugged him then. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't rushed. It was human. My head rested against his shoulder, and he held me steady, like that was all he was meant to do. "Good night," I whispered. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because anything happened, nothing did, but because I was aware of him down the hall. Aware that something had changed. Aware that this wasn't just a neighbor offering kindness. It was the beginning of something neither of us had named yet. I woke up before my alarm. For a split second, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. Different ceiling, unfamiliar quiet, the faint smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. I sat up slowly, wrapped the gray blanket tighter around myself, and listened. No tension. No panic. Just calm. When I stepped into the kitchen, James was already there, standing by the counter with 2 mugs. He looked up a little surprised, like he hadn't expected me yet. "Morning," he said. Morning. It wasn't awkward. That surprised me most. We stood side by side, sipping coffee in silence. The light through the window was soft, spilling over the fence like the day was easing into existence instead of rushing us. "I have no idea what I'm doing," I admitted eventually. He smiled faintly. "I don't think you're supposed to. You're just getting through the next minute." I nodded. That felt right. "Being here," I said quietly, "it feels like I can breathe." He didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. I stayed that day. There was no big decision, no conversation about what it meant. I just stayed. We moved around each other slowly, like 2 people learning a new rhythm. He made scrambled eggs. I handed him plates. He almost burned the toast and I laughed, actually laughed before I could stop myself. The sound surprised both of us. After breakfast, We sat in the living room while sunlight crept across the floor. I curled up on the couch, holding my mug with both hands. He sat nearby, close but careful, like he didn't want to cross an invisible line. I haven't felt this calm in a long time, I said. Like I'm allowed to just exist. You are, he said. You always were. Something in his voice made me look at him. There was no expectation in his eyes. No pressure. Just honesty. So I told him more. About the nights I'd sat at the dinner table alone while Mark worked late. About how conversations turned into updates instead of connection. About how lonely it feels to sleep beside someone who's already gone. I thought that was just what marriage turned into, I said quietly. I didn't even realize how empty I'd become. He listened. That was his gift. In the afternoon, we folded laundry together. I found a pink sock mixed in with his whites and held it up like evidence. Caught you, I said. He laughed, shaking his head. I deserve that. Later, we walked around the neighborhood. We didn't hold hands, but we walked close enough that our arms brushed now and then. Neither of us moved away. That evening, he made pasta. Nothing fancy. We ate at the table, talking about nothing important, movies we'd seen, places we'd never gone, dumb mistakes that felt lighter when spoken out loud. After dinner, we sat on the couch with a nature documentary playing quietly in the background. I tucked my legs beneath me, leaning into the cushions. It's strange, I said after a while. I don't feel bad being here. I don't think that's something to feel bad about. I rested my head against his shoulder. He didn't pull away. His arms settled around me naturally, like it didn't need instructions. The room felt full instead of quiet. I lifted my head to look at him. Our faces were close. Close enough that I could feel his breath. He hesitated, not pulling away, not moving closer, like he was waiting for me. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel numb. I leaned in. The kiss was soft, careful, brief. Less about desire and more about understanding. I pulled back almost immediately. I'm sorry, I said. You don't have to be, he replied. We didn't kiss again. I rested against his chest, listening to his steady breathing, and for the first time in days, my body stopped bracing for impact. I didn't know what this was. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just comfort anymore. And whatever came next was going to change both of us. After that night, nothing rushed forward. And somehow, that made everything feel heavier, in a good way. I went back to sleeping in my own house. I told myself I needed to face it, to stop avoiding the quiet rooms and the memories stacked inside them. James didn't argue. He didn't look disappointed. He just nodded like he understood something I hadn't fully said out loud yet. But every morning I found myself walking next door. Sometimes it was just for coffee. Sometimes I showed up with nothing to say at all. And he always opened the door like it made sense. There were days I cried without warning. Days I laughed and then immediately felt guilty for it. Days I talked about Mark like he was still part of my present, and days I couldn't say his name at all. James never tried to steer me away from any of it. He stayed. Slowly, I started to notice changes in myself. The tightness in my chest loosened. My sleep came back in fragments. The silence in my house stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like space. One afternoon, I sat across from James at his kitchen table, watching him scribble notes for work. You know, I said, I used to think grief would feel loud, screaming, breaking things. He looked up, and it feels quieter than that, I said, like something hollow that echoes when you move too fast. He nodded. Maybe that's why you don't have to rush. That stuck with me. A few weeks later, I invited him over for dinner. I was nervous opening my own door that night, like I was seeing my house for the first time. I'd opened windows earlier, let air move through rooms that had been closed for years. The heaviness was still there, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. James noticed immediately. It feels different, he said. I think I'm starting to live here again, I replied. We ate on the back patio as the sun dipped low, the air cool and gentle. It felt normal. And that scared me more than anything else. I think I'm ready, I said suddenly. He looked at me carefully. Ready for what? To move forward, I said. Not forget. Just continue. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. When I picture the future, I said quietly, you're in it. He squeezed my hand, gentle but sure. We'll take it slow. And we did. There was no dramatic shift. No sudden labels. Just small choices made over and over again. Morning coffee together. Walks after dinner. Long conversations that drifted from serious to ridiculous without either of us noticing when the shift happened. I was still grieving. I could feel it in the quiet moments, in the way my voice softened when Mark's name came up. Some days I needed space. Other days I leaned on James without thinking. He never rushed me either way. Slowly my house changed too. I repainted a room. Gave away clothes that no longer felt like mine. Opened windows even when it was cold outside, just to feel the air move. Each small change felt like a step back into myself. Months later, James stayed the night for the first time. There was nothing dramatic about it. No big declaration. We fell asleep talking, my head on his chest, his arm around me like it belonged there. That was when it finally hit me. This wasn't about replacing anyone. It wasn't about filling a hole. It was about two people meeting at a moment where honesty mattered more than timing. And I knew, whatever came next, it was real. A year passed without either of us noticing when it started. Life didn't change all at once. It shifted in small, almost invisible ways until one day I looked back and realized I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. James and I never rushed into anything. There was no moment where grief suddenly disappeared or where love announced itself loudly. Instead, it arrived the way healing often does, softly, patiently, asking permission instead of making demands. Some mornings I woke up heavy with memories. Other days, I felt light enough to laugh without catching myself afterward. James learned the difference without me needing to explain. When I needed space, he gave it. When I leaned into him, he held steady. Slowly, my house stopped feeling like a monument to the past. I repainted the spare room first. A pale, warm color that caught the light in the afternoon. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years, things that belonged to a version of me I no longer was. I opened windows more often, even in winter, letting cold air remind me I was still alive. One evening, months later, James stayed over at my place again. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We cooked dinner together, talked until the food went cold, laughed about nothing important. When we finally lay down, my head rested on his chest, his arm around me, steady and sure. I didn't feel like I was replacing anything. I felt like I was continuing. That was the difference. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the trees, I spoke the thought that had been sitting quietly in my chest for weeks. I used to think my life was over, I said. Like everything meaningful had already happened. James didn't interrupt. Now, I continued. I think it was just waiting. Waiting for me to be honest about how lonely I was. Waiting for me to stop pretending pain had rules. He squeezed my hand gently. Sometimes, he said, love doesn't show up with fireworks. Sometimes it just knocks softly and asks if it can come in. I smiled because I understood exactly what he meant. Love didn't erase my grief. It didn't rewrite my past, but it sat beside me while I carried it. And that made all the difference. I still think about Mark sometimes. About the years we shared, the lessons I didn't know I was learning then. Grief doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, less sharp. Something you can live with instead of something that lives inside you. James never asked me to forget. He just asked me to keep going. And so I did. If there's one thing this chapter of my life taught me, it's this. Healing doesn't mean moving on. It means moving forward. With honesty, with patience, and with the courage to let connection find you when you least expect it. Sometimes, the most life-changing moments don't come crashing in. Sometimes they knock. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps more stories like this find the people who need them. Red Heart, thanks for listening.